Here we go. Exercise 3H. If you were here for 3G last week, then it's pretty much similar, except it's just slightly different. So hence 3H is nice and easy. If you've done 3G or had a look at it, 3H and 3G are very similar. 3I just takes what you learned from 3G and H and add them on. I'm going to pause the video. Here we go. 3H, expressing and finding percentage of an amount. So remember last session you learnt to convert anything to a percentage. So to a percentage, you just literally multiply by 100. Oh, why did it freeze? Oh, it is frozen. I never froze it. Whereas converting percentages to fractions or decimals, then you just divide by 100. The nice thing about timesing 100 and divide by 100, especially if it's in decimals, you just move the decimal point. Yeah? So, let's take this first example. This is what you'll be doing in exercise 3H. Example 1 says, Dimmy scored 12 out of 20, right, for their test on percentages. So what is Dimmy's score as a percentage? Kind of like you, if you did your test, it was out of 20 and you got 12 and you want to know what the percentage is. It was pretty straightforward from here. 12 out of 20 can be written as a fraction. 12 out of 20 kind of means like 12 per 20. So for every 20 questions, you got 12 wrong. 12 right. Yeah? So 12 out of 20, that's a fraction. Now, if you want to know what the percentage is, based on what we've just got in our notes, converting fractions or decimals to percentage, all you have to do is multiply by 100. So here, how do we convert 12 out of 20 to a percentage? You literally do 12 over 20 times 100. Now, the faster that you can do this fraction, so 100 as a fraction is 100 over 1, the faster you can do this, the easier it is to find the percentage. Right? And again, you can use a calculator at this point, but you just want to practice, well, how do I change it to percentage? From here, exercise 3B, I taught you that multiplying fractions, you can do top with top, bottom and bottom, but the aim is to make it smaller. What two numbers can you see that we can make smaller already? Hands up if you know. Belinda. 20 and 100. Notice that 20 and 100 have a common factor or a number that can go into 20 and 100. What's that number? Can I please have? Let's go with Ryan. What number fits in 20 and what number fits in 100? 20. So we can then say 20 fits into 20. 20 also fits in 100. Now, let's say you didn't know that. You can divide by 10. That'll work. If you didn't even know that, you could also halve it. They're both even numbers. The point is just keep reducing them. Make the fraction smaller. In my case, well, in this case, I can see that 20 is the highest common factor. So 20 into 20 and 20 to 100. Now, how many 20s in 20? 1. So this becomes now 1. How many 20s in 100? 5. So this now becomes 5. So what we have now is our fraction is 12 over 1, and we're multiplying by 5 over 1, which is much easier than doing 12 over 20 times 100 over 1. Here we go. Let's work out the multiplication of fractions. Again, top with top, bottom with bottoms. Let's go with Zara Jones. What is 12 times 5 in the numerator? 60. Whereas 1 times 1 in the denominator gives me 1. But 60 over 1 is the same thing as writing 60. I'm not done yet. What's my answer? What am I missing? The percent. Because we were trying to change it to a percent. Writing 60 alone does not make sense. We times it by 100 to get a percent. So if you're missing that symbol, I will then mark you down. I need to see that you know it's a percentage change. Yeah? This is what you're doing in exercise 3H. Now, if this bit here is tricky, that was from exercise 3B, it's good practice again to make sure you can simplify by multiplying fractions. Let's try the next one. Express as a percentage. Example 2 says if you had $1 in your pocket and Mr. Tran gave you an extra $7 now, Okay? What is the percentage of gain in your pocket? Now let's think about it. You started off, initially, you started off with $1 in your own pocket. Later, you now end up with an extra $7, which total is, what's the total amount that you have in your pocket now? $8, right? But that means that you had to have an increase of $7 that I gave to you. So now you're from start to later. What I'm asking is that $7, especially in a business sense, we don't want to know just the value. We want to know the percentage. We want to know how much. Is that like an extra 50%? Is it an extra 20%? Or is it an extra 100%? How do we work that out? So here, let's have a look. You started off with $1. That's the only basis you've got to measure. I gave you an extra $7. So out of $1, which is what you started off with, I gave you 7. Can you see that? This is where the change, we've got to work out. It's 7 what you gain or loss out of what you started off with. So $7 out of every dollar that you began with. Now, if I want to change this to a percentage, what do you have to do? Times 100. Very good, Xavier. So from here, if you want to change it to a percentage, times by 100. But this is nice and convenient. 100 as a fraction is 100 over 1. There's nothing that I can simplify. So top with top, bottom with bottom. 7 times 100 gives me 700 over 1, which is 700%. Which makes sense because I gave you 7 times the amount that you had. So of course, it's more than 100%. It has to be 700% of what you actually gained. Okay, so the key formula here, if you weren't sure, write this down as a formula when you get these kind of questions. The formula is whatever the change is. So this is called the change. So I'm going to write here change. Change divided by initial. So what did you start off with? Times by 100 to get your percentage. Okay, so how do I know the change? Well, the change is whatever your starting point is minus from your after point. So 8 take away 1 is how I got the $7 change. And then if I know the change, it's change over what you start off with, not over 8. Okay, if you did 7 over 8, then that doesn't make sense. You're taking $7 out of something that you in the future would have. Yeah, so if you have $1 right now, you don't have $8 later. You got $1 right now. Your prediction in the future is that it's $8, but what's that gain can only be calculated what you have, not what you will have. Okay? So that $7 is 7 out of what you start off with. That's what the formula is. Copy that down just to help you if you're having troubles with those questions. So those are called change percentage problems. But if I zoom out, that is pretty much 3H. Okay, so 3H is what you're working with. You're working with how to change to a percentage, and you're just timing it by 100. Now, just on the bottom, there is a method that you don't need a calculator to do. It's called a unitary method. I'll show it after you learn the proper method. Okay, so let's learn the proper method first. Can you flip over the page? Flip over the page. And let's go down to this example 3 problem. So I want to teach you the proper method first, and then I'll show you the unitary method, which is a shortcut-ish. Works for when you're going to the shops and you're buying things and they say 25% off a t-shirt and you can quickly do it in your head. That's what unitary method is good for. But when you start working with more complicated problems, then the fraction method is the proper way to do it. Yeah? Let's do this one. So let's say you go to the shops. You see a top you like. $20, okay, you want to buy it, and they tell you, oh, by the way, today there's a 32% discount on all tops. You're like, cool. Now, most times they actually have the number for you, so they tell you what the sale price is. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just say 30% of all items, and then you have to figure it out yourself roughly, or you rely on the fact that the cashier does it for you, and they do it right. Yeah? So let's calculate it. 32% of $20. Let's work out how much are they taking off if there's a discount If I want to know there's taking a discount of 32% of 20, let's work that out. So first thing I need to work out is what is 32% of 20? See, one of the easiest things is if I didn't write 32%, if I said 50% of 20, most of us would like that. What's 50% of 20? $10. So if I told you it was a 50% off, you would have known that 50% of 20 is 10. But you know that intuitively. I want you to know how to do it properly. So 32% of 20, what does it mean? Let's break it apart. Here we go. I want you to write this down. 32%. In the previous lesson, you've learnt what 32% means. What's 32% mean again? Hands up if you remember. What's that as a fraction? Yeah, percent. Per means every. Cent means 100. So this means I've got 32 over 100. 20 is 20. But since that's a fraction, I'm going to change this to a fraction. So 20 over 1. The only problem that you don't understand might be the word of. Now, a lot of students confuse the word of with a different operation. Now, of could either mean add, subtract, multiply, or divide. Which one is it? Multiply, very good. Most students think it's divide, and it's not. Of actually means multiplication. The reason why students think of divide is because when I say half of 20, what you're doing in your head is you're doing 20 divided by 2. But the reason is actually half times 20 ends up being 1 times 20 is 20, 2 times 1 is 2. That's why you end up doing 20 divided by 2. But the reality is that you started off with times, not divide. But that's why when I ask a student, what's of mean? A lot of students tell me divide because they're seeing the end bit, but they're not realizing the starting bit. The starting bit is a times, then it ends up being a division. Yeah? So here, when I say 32% of 20, I'm just saying 32 over 100 times 20. If you can work that out, then you've got the percentage. So let's work it out. Now, when we're doing multiplication of fractions, you don't want to do top with top, bottom, bottom. You want to reduce it. What two numbers can you see already that you can reduce? 20 and 100 again. Just like before. Boys, thanks. 20 goes into both top and bottom here. 20 goes into 20 once. 20 goes into 100 5 times. So I can reduce the fraction to 32 over 5 multiplied to 1 over 1. That's much easier to do. Now when I multiply that together, I get 32 times 1, which is 32. 5 times 1, which is 5. This is your percent. Oh, so not percent. That's the value of 32% of 20 is 32 over 5. But most students don't know what that is. 32 over 5 is not a number that you're familiar with. That's why we changed this to a mixed fraction so people kind of understand. How many 5s fit in 32? 6 remainder? 2 out of 5. So this actually means when I say 32% of 20, it's about 6 and 2 fifths. But even then, the general population doesn't know their fractions. People don't like 6 and 2 fifths. They're like, what is that? So this is where you had to learn, well, how do you change 2 fifths into a decimal? And in our previous lessons, 2 over 5 just means 2 divided by 5. Or, how many 5s fit into 2? Now, we did this in our previous lessons. Let's do it again. Changing the decimals. How many 5s fit into 2? How many 5s fit into 2? 0. 2 fits into 5 2 times, but 5 is too big. So 5 can't fit into 2 0 times. There's a decimal. You carry the 2 over because 5 can't fit into 2, so that 2 must then get carried over. Now that's 20. How many 5s in 20? 4. So it's actually 0.4. So what this answer is, it's 6 units. And that's 0.4. So that's 6.4. This is what the general population prefer, especially people without maths. They just want the labels to tell you 32% of 20 is 6.4. Now, the process to get there, some of us feel quite intimidated with fractions and dividing, decimals. This is not for your average Joe. Okay, so for the mainstream, this is not easy. This requires a lot of skills that you should have had from chapter 3. But if you haven't, I can teach you a method now that you can still get the same answer without a calculator, and you don't need all of those skills. This is just for your everyday life. Yeah? It's not something I recommend, but it's for quick maths. Unitary method is good for every day. Yeah? So let's scroll back now. So we know the answer is 6.4. I'm going to go back. I'm going to teach you a bit of basics about unitary method, and you should be able to do this in your head. Okay, let's go. Let's go back here. Back to this front page. So I'm going to show you a method now without a calculator and without using fractions. We can actually work out 32%. So here we go. Starting off, 1%, 10%, 100%. If we write them all as a fraction, it means 1 out of 100. It means 10 over 100. And also means 100 over 100. Okay, so write that in. What's nice is 10 over 100 can be simplified to 1 over 10. Reason why is because 10 fits into both 10 and 100. So I'm going to highlight the key numbers here. So 1 over 100, 1 over 10. Whereas on the right-hand side of here, 100% means 100 over 100. What's 100 divided by 100? 1. All right. This is all you need. You just need to know the 1%, 10%, and 100% in terms of its numbers. What this means, when you say 1 over 100, what's interesting is that if I asked you what is 1% of 20, so here we go, let's say 1% of 20. If we wrote down what I said before to you, 1%, which we now know means 1 over 100, of means, what does of mean again? Multiply 20. Now notice that this actually ends up being 20 over 100. But this over 100 just means divide 100. So when you say 1% of anything, it's actually the same thing as you saying means divide by 100. Does that make sense? See, when I say 1% of 20, it ends up being 20 divided by 100. So if you want to find 1% of anything, you literally divide it by 100. But dividing 100 is special is because you just moved the decimal point 2 places. Then the same thing over here. See, 1 over 10, if I said, what is 10% of 20? What's nice about this is this actually ends up being 1 over 10 times 20, which ends up being 20 divided by 10. So what does it mean? Is you're actually just dividing by 10. When you say 10% of anything, you're actually just dividing the number by 10. So if I ask you what's 10% of 20, in your head you should just be doing 20 divided by 10. Now what's 20 divided by 10? 20 divided by 10 is 2, not 5. 20 divided by 10. Yeah? Equals 2. So that means 10% of 20 is 2. So if it's $20 and they said 10% off, you know you're already taking off $2. That's how quick it is. Whereas 100%, well, obviously you're dividing it by 1. Okay, so this means dividing by 1. Okay? So you got 3 tools to work out unitary method. 1%, 10%, and 100%. These are the 2 you're going to use the most. Divide 10 and divide 100. Here we go. So now that we got the unitary, let's do some examples so you feel a bit more confident. Let's have a look. First one, 10%. 10% of 20. We just worked out 10% means divide 10. That means divide 10. Can you see here? When I say 10% of 20, you're just taking 20 divided by 10. That's 2. Let's do the next one. 100% of 20. See, 100% means divided by 1. So really what you're doing is you're saying 20 divide 1. So 100% of 20 is just 20. What about 1% of 20? 1% of 20 just means 20, and you divide it by 100. Now what's 20 divided by 100? What's 20 divided by 100? Sorry, I thought you had your hand up, Carissa. 0.2. Okay, I don't think you knew that, but here we go. We've got 2 zeros. Remember, the number of zeros is the number of decimal points you move back. So starting from 20, 1, 2. So the answer is 0.2. Notice number of zeros for this one. There's 1 0. So I move back 1. That's why it's 2. This one, there's no zeros. So that's why you stay as it is. No zeros, so it stays as 20. So this is special. If you can find 1% and 10%, you can find most in a shopping center. So let's do something like this now. Let's ask, what's 10% of 38? Let's ask someone in this class here. So 10% of 38. 10% means divide 10. So I'm asking you, if I ask you, what is 10% of 38? I'm asking, what is 38 divided by 10? 1 0, move 1 decimal point. What is the answer? Can I please have, let's go with Yu Chen. What's 38 divided by 10? 3.8. Because there's only 1 0, you move the decimal point back 1. 3.8. So 10% of 38 is easy. It's 3.8. So if it was a $38 top and they said 10% off, you know you're taking off $3.80 of whatever the price is. So 38 bucks, take away 3.80. Let's try the next one. Now 30%. No, I didn't teach you 30%, but notice 30% is just 10% times 3. That's what 30% means. So if you can find 10%, you can work out what 30% is. So let's do it again. What is 10%? Whoops. What is 10% of 25 to begin with? Because I don't want to find 30. I don't know how to do 30, but I can do 10. 10% of 25, let's go with Eknor. 2.5, because 10% means divide by 10. So you got 25, divide 10, 1 0, move the decimal point back 1. It's 2.5. But 2.5, if you want 30%, you need 3 of them. What's 2.5 plus 2.5 plus 2.5? 7.5. So 30% of 25 is really just 7.5 because I'm just doing 2.5 times 3. And you can do that quickly in your head. Right? So that's the benefit of knowing your unitary method because you can break them all into 10% and 1%. I'll leave these two for you to try, but let's go back to the next this question here. Let's do example 3. I want you to find 32% of 20 using a unitary method here. How does it work? See, the 32%, you can make 3 of those 10%, and to get 2%, you only need 2 of those 1%. Let's work it out. To work out 10%, what is 10% of 20? Let's go with Xavier. What's 10% of 20? That just means divide by 10, remember? So it's 2. If 10% of 20 is 2, but 30% means that you got 3 of them, what's 30% equal to then? 6. Because we want 30, and this is the 2, right? To get 30, I just need 10. 10 times 3 will give me the 30. But Xavier told me that 10% is 2, so if I got 30%, just means 3 of them. So that means already I've got $6. Let's work out the 2%. But to work out the 2%, I just need to know 1%. Let's work out. What is 1% of 20? That just means divide 100. What's 20 divided by 100? Can I please have, let's go Jacob. What's 20 divided by 100? 0.2. There's 2 decimal points there. So 2 zeros. Move it back twice. 1, 2. You got 0.2. But that's only for 1%. If you got 2%, you got double of that. What's double of 0.2? 0.4. Times this by 2 gives you 0.4. So together, 30%, which is 6, 2%, which is equal to 0.4, put it together is 6 plus 0.4, 6.4. I did not use fractions. I did not use divide decimals, and I got exactly the same answer. And all I did was divided by 10 and divided by 100. That's all I did. And you can all divide by 10. And all of you can work with divide by 100. It's just whether you can work with decimals and doubling them. Now, most times in the shopping center, you're not going to get 32%. You get 5s. You get 35%. To get a 5% is just half of 10. So if you can do 10%, half that, and you get your 5%. Get me? So that's why it's easy to work out when you're in a shopping center. If I gave you a top that's $72 and I said it's 15% off, you can quickly work it out. Boys, you've been chitty-chatting the whole time. I'm sort of ignoring that. But I don't know what it is that you'd have to be chatting for more than 10 minutes. Hopefully it's done by now. Yeah? All right. So that's your exercise 3H there. That's to work on how to practice finding the proper method is to find the percentage of. This is called a unitary method that will help you if you're in a shopping center. Just a quick method. Not something I encourage you to do all the time, but it is a good one just to help on the side that you can quickly do. All right. Let's move on to the last page, which is 6I. That last page is just one small increment, and then we'll stop there because tomorrow's session we're not there. So I just want you to work on 3H. That's one of your key skills. Otherwise, everything else before, that's what you should be focusing on. Okay? But let's go to 3I. 3I is only additional to what you've just learnt. Let's go with this one. Example 1, if you're onto that page now, 3I percentage increase, decrease. So let's say you had $40 and it increases by 30%. How much is it now? So first thing again, you just need to know what is 30% of 40. Now you can use a unitary method. 30% of 40 is easiest to find. Find 10% of 40 first. What is 10% of 40? Let's go with, who have I chosen on this side? Let's go with Charlotte. 10% of 40. Very good. It's just dividing by 10. 10% means divide by 10. So 40 divided by 10 is 4. Now if 10% is 4, then what is 30% equal to? Can I please have Hamza? If 10% is 4, then what's 30% equal to? Times it by 3. Very good. So what's 4 times 3? 12. Very good. That's it. Because 30% is 3 times that 3 of those 10s. So if 10% is 4, then 30% must be 12. So when we said you had $40, the problem was you had $40 in your pocket, but it increased by 30%. Well, 30% for a lot of people, they don't understand. So this language makes more sense. 30% is $12. So now if you had an increase, are you adding or are you subtracting to your amount? Adding. So you're adding on $12. So together, how much do you have? $52. But this 12 is what was hard for a lot of students because they don't know how to work out 30% of 40. Because we say increase by 30%. How much is 30%? So you need to work out what 30% of 40 is. You can use the unitary method or you can use the fraction method and you would have got the same answer. So exercise 3I is just additional. It's adding. So if increase, decrease is subtracting. So you either lose money or you increase money. Kind of like investments. You put in money. Does it make more money over time or does it lose money over time? Okay. Let's do the last example on this side. What if I switch the problem and I said you had $40 in your pocket, but this time it decreases by 20%. Let's work it out. What's 20% of 40? Let's go with Josh. If 10% of 40 is 4, then what's 20% of 40? So 10% of 40 is 4, then what's 20% of 40? Well, 2 times that. Yeah, because 10% is equal to 4. Then if you have 20%, means double of that. So double of 4 is 8. So 20% of 40 must be 8. Because we know that 10% is 4. So if you have 2 of those 10%, it's just double 4. Right? So that's why you get 8. So if you know that you're decreased by $8, you started off with 40 and your decreasing means subtracting, you take away 8. You're not increasing money, you're losing money. So 40 take away 8 gives you 32. But you see that problem, what stops students is this bit. They don't understand what 20% means, and they don't understand what 30% means. But if I went into any maths class and I said, you have $40 and you lost $8, everyone can calculate that. If I went in the class and I said, you have $40 and then you increased by $12, everyone can answer that. The only problem is when I change the language to 30% and decrease by 20%, students can't do. And the reason why is because you don't know what 20% of a number is. Now, I've taught you 2 methods. One is the fraction method, and 2 is a unitary method that allows you to do it quickly in your head. Okay, so this is 3i. Only do 3i if you're comfortable with fraction and unitary method. Otherwise, go back to 3g, go back to 3h. Make sense? By the end of this week, remember, it's just what you were missing from last week. So I think it was 3e. 3... Did we do F? Yeah, we did do F. Yeah, 3F and then 3G if you haven't done that one. Okay, so that was just on the Monday. You had an extra half session to do. So F should have been due. G is what I wanted you to have in by this week. And if you can do H as well, that's fantastic. If you're jumping onto I, then we're now catching up. All right, so I'm going to stop the video here. That's it for today's lesson. Thank you, team.